Sacrificial lambs. Chapter 1. Siti Aisyah woke before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing outside her small hut in the village. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and sighed, looking around the sparse room. Just a worn sleeping mat on the dirt floor, a rickety table with one chair, and a bucket in the corner for washing. This was her life, day after tired day. She splashed some water on her face from the bucket and changed into her stained work clothes. Another long day harvesting rice awaited her under the sweltering Indonesian sun. The work was backbreaking and the pay pitiful. But it was the only way Aisyah could scrape together a few dollars to help support her parents and younger siblings. Aisyah's family lived hand to mouth, barely surviving on the meager wages she and her father earned doing manual labor. Her mother looked after her 3 little brothers and sisters at home. They were all crammed into the small hut together. Some nights, with growling stomachs, Aisyah would pretend to not be hungry so her siblings could have a little more rice. She was always hungry, dreaming of the day she could afford to buy them meat. At 18 years old, Aisyah felt she should be doing more with her life. Other village girls her age were already married off, busy cooking, cleaning, and raising children full-time. But Aisyah's family couldn't afford the dowry to arrange a marriage for her. Not that she wanted that life anyway. No, Aisyah yearned for something different, an opportunity to escape this endless cycle of poverty. As she walked to the rice paddies, she passed a rare sight in a remote village, a young man watching something on his smartphone. Aisyah paused to look over his shoulder. On the small screen, a group of young people around Aisyah's age were dancing and singing in a slick pop music video. They wore expensive designer clothes, makeup, jewelry. They looked so glamorous and carefree. Aisyah's eyes widened as she watched them laughing and celebrating their fabulous lifestyles. She'd seen a few snippets of these Korean pop videos before when someone passing through the village had a phone. She was mesmerized every time. Could I ever have a life like that? She wondered. The young man noticed Aisyah staring and angled the phone away, trudging off. She sighed again and continued her long walk to work. The day was grueling as usual. Under the baking sun, bent over for hours harvesting rice stalks by hand, Aisyah's back and shoulders ached. She was soaked in sweat. Her hands were calloused and raw. She glanced over at the other village girls, all working just as hard. They smiled and tried to chat lightheartedly to pass the time, but their exhaustion showed on their faces. This was Aisyah's fate too if she didn't find a way out soon. Every year that went by, her dreams of a different life slipped further away. That evening, Aisyah collapsed onto her sleeping mat, every muscle throbbing. She laid there unmoving, listening to her family bustle around preparing their meager dinner. "Here, Aisyah, you must be hungry," her mother said kindly, passing her a small bowl with a few spoonfuls of rice. Aisyah sat up reluctantly and ate slowly, even though she was ravenous. Her nibbling siblings eyed her bowl longingly. "You eat it," she said, handing the remainder to her little brother and sister to share. Their faces lit up as they gulped it down. Aisyah gave a small, tired smile. At least she could do this little thing for them. She fell back onto the mat, wondering how many more countless days she had left living and working in this village until she withered away, anonymous and forgotten. There had to be more out there for her. She just needed the chance to find it. As Aisyah drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of the glamorous pop stars again, beckoning her to come join their world. Chapter 2. Several hundred miles away in Vietnam, Doan woke with a start. She bolted upright, heart pounding. Just another nightmare? Ever since she was a child, Huong had been plagued by bad dreams. Shadowy figures chasing her, falling from heights, finding herself naked in public places. She took a few deep breaths, waiting for her heart rate to slow. Huong peered around the tiny bedroom she shared with her two cousins. They were still sound asleep. She envied them. Her sleep was always fitful, and she woke most mornings before the sunrise, mind racing with worries. She tiptoed outside into the darkened alleyway between the cramped buildings of the neighborhood on the outskirts of Hanoi. Her family was crammed into this two-room unit with several other relatives, eking out a living however they could. Huong's mother cleaned offices late into the night. Her father did odd construction jobs. Everyone pooled their meager earnings just so they could eat. Huong helped too, working long hours at a nearby garment factory, inhaling fabric dust as she operated the sewing machines. She made barely $150 in a month. It was never enough. Huong worried constantly about money. How would they pay rent this month? Could they afford her brother's school fees? What little luxuries could she afford to occasionally buy her mother to brighten her difficult life? At 28, Huong felt she should have achieved more, for their sake and hers. She was bold and ambitious by nature, eager to explore life beyond this crowded, noisy neighborhood where she'd spent her whole life. Other local girls her age were settling down, having babies, fully embracing their roles as wives and mothers. But not Huong. There had to be more out there for her. She was certain of it. She dreamed of spreading her wings, of independence, respect, fame even. She just needed the chance to go after it. Huong decided to go for a walk to calm her restless mind. As she strolled past shuttered shop fronts on the dark, pre-dawn streets, she heard a ruckus down one alley. Curious, she crept closer to peek. There was a group of young Vietnamese men huddled around a smartphone, watching some kind of video and laughing raucously. Huong edged nearer. On the small screen, she could make out a troupe of Korean boys dancing together, smiling and having fun. It was the popular K-pop band BTS, she realized. How handsome and carefree they seemed. Huong had occasionally seen glimpses of these glossy K-pop artists on social media. She loved the colorful, glamorous images of them singing, dancing, modeling trendy outfits. They had millions of fans, thousands of screaming girls who idolized them. They got to travel the world performing to adoring crowds. Huong was mesmerized. Was it so crazy to think she could have a taste of that lifestyle for herself someday? Huong had always been a performer at heart. As a little girl, she would put on shows for her family, dressing up, coming up with elaborate dance routines, anything to get some applause and attention. She continued down the dark streets, the K-pop images still blazing in her mind. A life like that seemed so out of reach living here. But maybe, just maybe, if the right chance came along, she could grasp it. Huong hurried back home as the sunrise began to illuminate the shabby buildings, renewed hope blooming inside her. Chapter 3. A few days later, both Siti, Aisyah, and Doan Huong noticed intriguing flyers posted around their neighborhoods. They announced that a new TV production company was holding auditions for a prank show that would be featured on YouTube. The flyers showed photos of young, hip people goofing around together. "Want to be part of an exciting new prank show?" the ad shouted in bold letters. "Come show us your confidence and natural acting skills." Aisyah and Huong felt their pulses quicken looking at those flyers. Neither of them had acting experience, but both had secretly harbored dreams of performing and entertaining. And this YouTube show sounded like so much fun. It offered exactly the kind of opportunity and excitement they craved. On the day of the audition, Aisyah walked into a bustling room at a hotel in Jakarta packed with around 50 other hopefuls. Everyone looked just as eager as she felt. One by one, they were called in to do short acting improvisations with different prank scenarios. When it was Aisyah's turn, her nerves melted away as she playfully pretended to be a manicurist painting the fingernails of the show's producers. She had them cracking up with her over-the-top antics. After a few more acting games, Aisyah floated out of the audition feeling confident she had performed well. Across the sea in Hanoi, Huong had a similar experience at her audition. She hammed it up as a terrible waitress, miming spilling food everywhere much to the producer's delight. She left the audition buoyed, certain her bubbly personality had won them over. A week later, both Aisyah and Huong were shocked but thrilled to receive word that they had been selected. They would be flown to Kuala Lumpur to begin training for the show. This was really happening. Upon arriving at the TV studio office, Aisyah and Huong were dazzled by its hip, youthful vibe. The producers seemed incredibly charismatic and enthusiastic. "You two are just perfect for our show," the head producer said. "We love your energy, and don't worry about experience. We picked people with natural acting talent to teach our unique style." The other new cast members were all young wannabe actors/models. Everyone was abuzz about this big opportunity. The training began immediately, starting with acting workshops focused on improv games and prank scenarios. Aisyah and Huong were thrown together frequently as scene partners. Though complete opposites, Aisyah was shy and gentle, while Huong was louder and bolder. They bonded quickly. It was comforting to have another young woman who also came from a poor background trying to change her life. "Can you believe they picked me?" Aisyah whispered to Huong one day. "Of course," Huong said. "You're a star, girl. This is our chance to have real careers." The training was characterized by a laid-back, fun atmosphere. Everyone cracked jokes and goofed off together between learning prank techniques. The producers brought in YouTube talent managers to teach them about building their personal brands and gaining followers. "This will make you famous," one instructor told the eager group. "Who knows, maybe you'll be the next big influencer." There were a few odd things mixed in that the cast didn't understand, as strange theology lessons, some combat training exercises. But the producers just laughed it off. "We like pushing boundaries and trying new things." Aisyah and Huong were too enamored with the promise of fame to question anything. They were just thrilled to be there. For the first time ever, their dreams felt tantalizingly within reach. Chapter 4. On February 13, 2017, Kim Jong-nam, exiled half-brother of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, arrived at the Kuala Lumpur airport to catch a flight home to Macau. Jong-nam took his time ambling through the gleaming terminal, browsing duty-free shops. Though once considered heir apparent in North Korea, those ambitions had been cruelly stripped away. Jong-nam's childhood, battling his younger brother for their father's approval, had bred simmering resentment. But back then, Jong-nam held the clear advantage as eldest son. He lived a pampered, elite lifestyle in Pyongyang with every privilege. The strange little brother who their father suddenly took a shine to never seemed like a threat. How quickly fortunes changed. Kim Jong-il saw ruthlessness and cunning in young Jong-un that the easygoing Jong-nam lacked. By 2001, to his shock, Jong-nam was ordered into exile. His father had made up his mind on the succession plan. In his exile, Jong-nam often spoke out against his brother's regime, criticizing its repression and isolationism. This made Jong-un increasingly paranoid that Jong-nam could rally opposition. He tightened security to keep the exiled older brother under surveillance. Jong-nam kept a low profile, traveling between Macau, Singapore, and Malaysia. He missed his lavish old lifestyle, but still managed to indulge in casinos and entertainment thanks to secret funds from his sympathizers in North Korea. He watched from afar as his strange little brother cemented power through ever more brutal means. Now 46 years old, Jong-nam hoped to one day see the regime collapse under its own malice. Surely the North Korean people would eventually rise up. If that day came, perhaps Kim Jong-un would be ousted. But Jong-nam took no active steps to spur such a movement, not wanting to put his life at further risk. In fact, Jong-nam planned to lay even lower going forward. He was uneasy about the recent airport assassination of his half-brother Kim Jong-nam using a chemical weapon. If Jong-un was willing to kill one blood relation, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate another. Jong-nam picked up some gifts in the duty-free stores for his two young daughters back in Macau. They were likely the only people left in the world who cared about him. He cherished the little time he got to spend with them between his travels. With their mother, he at least had a loving family, the one comfort left in his life. Jong-nam checked his watch. Still time before his flight. He decided to head to one of the airport cafes and treated himself to a fancy coffee and pastry. As he ate, he fantasized about his daughter's delight when he showed up with presents in hand. The simple joys he could still cling to. Jong-nam left the cafe feeling pleased with the chunk of time before boarding. No need to hurry to the gate. He took his time strolling through the gleaming corridors, deftly avoiding the crowds swarming past. Chapter 5. Siti awoke at dawn feeling nervous flutters in her stomach. Today was February 13, 2017, a day she and Huong had been anticipating for weeks. The producers had finally declared their prank training complete. They were ready to start filming actual content for the YouTube show. All the cast members buzzed with excitement at the studio as the producers explained the plan. Today, each person would be assigned a mark, an unsuspecting member of the public at the Kuala Lumpur airport. They would carry out their pranks to capture funny reactions for the first episode. "This is your chance to show us what you've learned," the head producer said. He looked especially upbeat. "We have a good feeling this will be a hit." Aisyah still couldn't believe this was her real life now, applying pranks at the airport that would soon be seen by thousands online. Before, poverty had confined her to the rice fields, day in and out. Now here she was, poised to achieve her dreams of fame and fortune. The producers handed out details of each person's mark along with props for their pranks. Aisyah and Huong were partnered up again. The women scanned their assignment sheet eagerly. Mark, Asian male, approx. 45 years old, traveling alone. Prank, sneak up behind the mark and cover his face with lotion as part of an impromptu face massage. Act like an eager beautician pestering a customer until he laughs and plays along for the camera. Aisyah and Huong memorized their plan, giddy with excitement. The producers handed them a small bottle of what looked like lotion and shooed them toward their terminal. This was it. Camera crew in tow, they rushed off to find their mark, giggling together at the fun chaos they were about to unleash. Jong-nam sat comfortably in a cafe near his gate, declining the server's offer for more coffee. He checked his watch again. Still another 30 minutes until boarding time. After so many years living in exile, he'd learned to treasure unplanned moments like this, time to sit and watch the world go by, almost forgetting for a while the family that had cast him out. He stretched and gazed out the window, pondering where he might take his daughters first when he got back to Macau. Maybe to try that new Italian restaurant? He knew how his younger girl loved noodles. His musings were interrupted when a ruckus erupted just outside the cafe entrance. Jong-nam turned to look and saw a young Asian woman energetically chasing down an older bald man while waving around some kind of lotion bottle. The man looked baffled, dodging her attempts to grab at his face. Suddenly, the woman succeeded in smearing liquid all over the man's head, leaving him spluttering in shock. Nearby, another young Asian woman doubled over laughing while a film crew captured the ridiculous scene. Some kind of prank show, Jong-nam realized. He watched for a moment, bemused as the oblivious bald man eventually composed himself enough to shove the women away and storm off grumbling. Jong-nam shook his head and went back to gazing out the window. Youth could be so foolish, though he supposed harmless fun had its place too. He certainly had plenty of wild adventures himself back when the world still lay at his feet, before his own brothers so maliciously. A sudden searing, burning pain jolted Jong-nam from his thoughts. His eyes watered reflexively from an overwhelming chemical stench. What was happening? He lurched to his feet, beginning to panic. Through blurry eyes, he could just make out two women rushing away, faces stunned. The same pranksters from before? Had they sprayed him with something? Jong-nam stumbled from the cafe, barely able to breathe through the nausea and chest pain. He cried out for help, collapsing to the floor as the poison acted fast. Airport staff rushed over, faces etched with horror as they took in his condition. Jong-nam's mind raced in confusion and agony. Poison? His own brother finally moving to eliminate him? He tried to speak, but only choked whimpers emerged. The pain was unbearable now, seizing his muscles and organs. This was far worse than any death he could have imagined. As Jong-nam's body succumbed to violent seizures, his thoughts drifted to his daughters, who he'd never hold again. Then to his childhood dream of inheriting his father's throne before Kim Jong-un so callously snatched it away. He hoped now at least the world would see the truth about the brutal darkness at the heart of the North Korean regime. With this last flash of righteous anger, the exiled brother whom Kim Jong-un had so feared but never properly understood slipped away. Aisyah and Huong giggled as they hurried away from the strange bald man they'd pranked. The look on his face when they'd smeared the lotion. This episode was going to be hilarious. Their giddiness faded, though, as they heard shouting behind them. An airport staff member came rushing up, face serious. "What have you done? That man needs medical help," he cried. Aisyah and Huong traded panicked looks. What did he mean? They turned back hesitantly to see the man lying motionless as a crowd gathered around him. No, this couldn't be part of their harmless prank. Security guards arrived rapidly. Before Aisyah and Huong could grasp what was happening, they found themselves detained in a small room without explanation. They clung to each other, terrified and confused. It was only much later they learned the awful truth. The lotion they'd been handed was actually lethal 5 nerve agent, and the man they'd pranked was dead by their hands. Chapter 6. Siti Aisyah couldn't stop her body from shaking as she huddled in the corner of the stark, cramped jail cell. She kept replaying the moment from hours earlier over and over in her mind, the image of the unconscious man lying on the airport floor, emergency medics swarming uselessly around him. That couldn't have been real. This had to be some awful nightmare. She would wake from any moment. But the cold bite of the handcuffs on Aisyah's wrists and the occasional slamming of doors down the corridor confirmed that this was all really happening. She had woken up this morning giddy with excitement about her glamorous new life as a YouTube star. Now by the day's end, she found herself imprisoned as a murder suspect. Earlier, detectives had grilled Aisyah for hours trying to extract a confession, but she only sobbed hopelessly in response. She had no idea how a silly prank could have turned into this horrifying disaster. The lotion the producers gave her was obviously poison. Aisyah could see that now. But they had seemed so kind and enthusiastic about the show. She trusted them completely. It never occurred to Aisyah they might be tricking her, using her as an oblivious pawn. She thought back guiltily on the odd parts of their training, the combat exercises, and strange theology lessons. At the time, she brushed them off, too intoxicated by the promise of fame. Aisyah cursed herself now for being so blind, so desperate to escape poverty, that she ignored any warning signs. And the man she had inadvertently murdered, he was clearly no random mark selected for a prank. The detectives revealed he was Kim Jong-nam, exiled brother of North Korea's ruthless leader. Aisyah shuddered, imagining the dark forces behind the sinister plot. What had she stumbled into? She longed to rewind time, cling to her simple village life plowing the fields. That seemed like paradise compared to the nightmare she was trapped in now. On the other side of the facility, Doan Huong sat scrunched in a fetal position on her own cell's cot. She pressed her palms desperately against her ears, trying to block out the echoing sobs of neighboring prisoners. Usually, Huong hated silence. She was accustomed to the constant cacophony of Hanoi streets. But now, the anguish surrounding her was too much to bear. Huong squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to wake up from this bad dream. Like so many others, she'd survived through sheer willpower. She could get through this too, she repeated to herself like a mantra. But even Huong's fierce spirit had its limits. She could not erase the image of the dying man's eyes burned into her mind. Eyes that initially looked amused by their silly prank, then wildly panicked as he realized their intent. She had murdered someone. Huong the dreamer, Huong the performer, Huong the ambitious girl determined to grasp life with both hands. All her hopes and hunger meant nothing now. She was just a killer. Sobs finally broke through as the weight of this truth buckled Huong's stubborn defenses. She wept bitterly for the man whose life she destroyed, for her terrified parents who would learn of her awful crime, for herself most of all, the tragic loss of the future she'd so yearned for. Huong cried until she had no tears left, her face swollen and raw. She had no other outlets for her grief, guilt, and shame except to unleash them in this barren cell. Ironically, after a lifetime of feeling caged by poverty, now she found herself imprisoned in truth, her wings irrevocably clipped by her own naivete. Chapter 7. 1 year later, Aisyah sat numbly on a wooden bench in a Kuala Lumpur courtroom, barely listening as lawyers debated back and forth. She clasped her trembling hands tightly in her lap, dreading the moment the judge would finally reach a verdict. Guilty, that had to be it. All this endless legal wrangling was just delaying the inevitable. How could Aisyah expect any mercy after playing a role in an assassination? She fully acknowledged her guilt in that, even if she had been cruelly duped. The trial itself had been a prolonged, torturous ordeal. The murder charges meant death by hanging if convicted. Aisyah's state-appointed lawyers argued she was an unwitting pawn rather than calculated killer. But Aisyah struggled to convey this while on the stand, overwhelmed by trauma and fear. The trial had exploded into a tense international dispute. North Korea denied any involvement despite the obvious links between Kim Jong-nam's murder and Pyongyang's leadership. Malaysian authorities worked to keep Aisyah imprisoned and silenced. Meanwhile, Indonesia continuously pressed for her charges to be dropped and freedom returned. The back and forth added to the nightmarish nature of it all. Aisyah felt powerless as she was passed around between warring political factions. She longed to reclaim her voice and identity after having them stripped away by all sides. But the judicial system never cared about her as a person, only as a political pawn. So Aisyah waited miserably for the judge to seal her doomed fate, mourning all she'd lost. No charming producers or dreams of fame anymore. In their place, Aisyah now had only this fetid, claustrophobic courtroom and the cold metal handcuffs chafing her wrists. She thought of her family back in their hut, following the trial's lurid headlines. Her mother was likely lighting incense at their family shrine every day, praying desperately for her only daughter's life. The little siblings Aisyah had worked so hard to provide for probably thought she had abandoned them. Meanwhile, Huong sat just meters away in the courtroom's prisoner dock. They were forbidden to speak. But during the proceedings, Huong would sometimes catch Aisyah's eye, giving a small nod as if to say, "Be strong." Even now, she looked stoic, determined not to show fear. Aisyah envied Huong's resilience. She knew the Vietnamese woman still stubbornly clung to hope and the belief that her inexhaustible luck hadn't run out yet. Aisyah simply felt bleak resignation about what lay ahead. The judge's voice cut through Aisyah's gloom. The two defendants have been found not guilty. They are to be released immediately. Aisyah's head jerked up, certain she misheard. But there was Huong already crying joyfully, rushing to embrace her. They were free. Chapter 8. On the day Aisyah finally returned home, a tiny village was transformed. Normally quiet dirt roads bustled with scooters, food vendors and gawkers eager to see the local woman who had been splashed across international news. Aisyah kept her head down as she emerged from the car, overwhelmed by the crowds. A band playing traditional Indonesian instruments greeted her cheerfully. Village elders clasped her hands, blessing her homecoming. "All right, let her through," her father declared gruffly, parting the crowds for Aisyah and her lawyer to pass. Despite his relief at having his daughter back safely, he remained anxious to shield her from further trauma. Inside the family's small hut, Aisyah's little siblings reacted with a mix of fascination and shyness at this version of their sister. In their memories, she had always been a tireless caregiver, never far from home. Now here Aisyah was back from a staggering ordeal in a faraway megacity they couldn't fathom. "Will you play with us again?" her shy little sister finally asked. Aisyah hugged the girl tightly. "Of course, I've missed you all so much." But fitting back into tranquil village life proved difficult. Having stared death in the face for over a year, Aisyah struggled to care about trivial concerns like monsoon floods damaging the rice fields. She appreciated afresh the unconditional love of family that fear and isolation had threatened to cut her off from. Yet Aisyah also felt restless. She yearned to speak out about her experiences, advocate against manipulation of vulnerable youth. But Malaysian authorities pressured her to stay silent, hoping to avoid damaging relations with North Korea. This left her feeling muzzled, story incomplete. There were still no real answers about the producers who'd orchestrated the fake audition and training. The Malaysian police investigation stalled quickly under diplomatic pressure from North Korea. Aisyah also worried endlessly about financial hardships her family had endured in her absence. She was determined to find work immediately and do whatever necessary to support them after all the suffering she'd caused. But always lurking beneath daily concerns was the trauma Aisyah knew she hadn't fully processed. Images of Jong-nam dying on that airport floor haunted her, and the betrayal still ached, realizing how eagerly she'd put her life in the hands of manipulators for a slim chance at fame. For now, Aisyah soaked up this bittersweet return to familiar ground beneath the Indonesian sun. But inside, she understood a piece of herself was forever changed by what she had witnessed on foreign shores far away. Chapter 9. Doan Huong landed back in Hanoi to a vastly more subdued welcome than her Indonesian counterpart. A handful of family members awaited to sweep Huong stealthily into a car, avoiding any public scene. In Vietnam, state-controlled media depicted her as an embarrassing criminal whose reckless actions had complicated diplomatic relations with North Korea. Huong's surprise acquittal in Malaysia was downplayed as an odd technicality. So Huong found herself back under Hanoi's perpetual gray skies, confined again to a cramped unit shared with extended family. After the surreal courtroom drama in Malaysia, Huong struggled to adapt to this bustling but predictable environment. Her family felt like strangers now after long separation. Conversations were stilted, avoiding mention of how she had shattered their simple lives. Huong's mother wept with relief to have her eldest daughter safely home, but couldn't hide her profound shame and disappointment. "Why did you get mixed up in something so foolish?" she lamented. Huong had no good answer. The convictions she'd clung to in prison, that she was a victim, undeserving of punishment, and now felt far less certain. Had her greed and recklessness caused this tragedy? Huong agonized over her role. She ventured out occasionally, but was met by frosty reactions or outright rejection by old friends. Huong's local notoriety hung over her now like a dark cloud, obscuring the bright, vivacious woman. As the days dragged on, Huong grew listless and depressed. She missed the sense of purpose that upholding her innocence had given her. She found herself dwelling endlessly on the dead man's face, his last moments of terror. Huong knew she needed to rebuild her life. But how? She contemplated trying to parlay attention from the trial into income via social media. But the idea of profiting from her role in a murder, however unintended, sickened her. Some days Huong simply hid under her blanket, longing to restart her life back to zero. But there was no relief to be found. She carried the burden of ghosts now. This aimless purgatory couldn't last forever, Huong realized. She had to find meaning again, whatever form that took. Perhaps she could help wayward youths avoid the false promises that had ensnared her. For now, Huong subsisted in a kind of limbo, physically free but emotionally captive to the past. Chapter 10. 1 year passed slowly and painfully for Siti Aisyah as she continued efforts to regain normalcy of any kind. She took a factory job sewing garments, finding the repetitive manual work soothing. Her co-workers knew of her past life, though, regarding Aisyah with a mix of awe and wariness. The infamous trials still drew international press scrutiny, too, making it impossible to fade into anonymity. So Aisyah avoided socializing, focusing single-mindedly on task after task to keep her haunted mind occupied. At night, she clung fiercely to her little siblings like a shield against the darkness. Their innocent affection was a balm helping Aisyah heal. She managed to persuade Malaysian authorities to let her give one brief media interview. Aisyah used the platform to confirm she had been misled and had no prior intent to murder. After that, she determinedly withdrew from any further spotlight. "The only closure I need is being here with my loved ones," Aisyah told her family. Malaysia and Indonesia's shaky diplomatic relationship wasn't her burden to carry anymore. She just wanted some peace. But that peace was disrupted one day when unexpected visitors arrived in the village. Doan Huong and her mother. Aisyah greeted them warmly but uncertainly. The two women hadn't spoken at all since they were freed. "I'm so sorry to intrude," Huong said. "I just felt like I needed to see you." The pair went on long walks around the village over the following days, conversing for the first time in years. Huong described her struggle to adjust to freedom and purposelessness. "I just feel so confused and guilty," she told Aisyah. Aisyah listened with empathy. "I feel the same. We experienced this tragedy together, so maybe we can heal together too." The women found solace in sharing their emotional burdens at last. The manipulators had meant to divide them. Now bonding honestly as victims united them. No magical healing occurred, but the cracks within both women mended slightly. One evening, they stood side by side, watching the setting sun paint gold streaks across the rice fields. "What a beautiful place to call home," Yuan said softly. "It is," Aisyah replied. "But do you think we might find a kind of beauty elsewhere too someday?" Huong squeezed her friend's hand in agreement. For the first time in years, the two women began looking to the future with tentative hope rather than bleak resignation. Their old dreams might have died, but new ones could yet emerge from the ashes. Chapter 11. Another year passed. Siti Aisyah now lived in Jakarta, having finally mustered the courage to leave her village and attempt restarting life in a new environment. She got work with a non-profit aiding vulnerable refugee populations. Helping recent victims of trafficking and exploitation felt meaningful. Aisyah could empathize with their suffering and desperation in forging better lives. In her off hours, Aisyah attended university, slowly working toward a degree in social work. She also began cautiously engaging with media again about her extraordinary personal experiences. Focusing only on the present day, she described efforts to reclaim her voice and turn hardship into social contribution. The attention still felt uncomfortable at times. Aisyah remained haunted by her mistakes, which had cost an innocent man's life. But keeping silent out of shame served no one, she realized. If exposing past naivete and manipulation helped spare others from similar fates, it was her responsibility. During this time, Aisyah and Huong stayed in close touch. Huong wrote affectionately that she was so proud of Aisyah for finding purpose again on her own terms. For her part, Huong had returned to Malaysia to advocate for migrant workers, drawing on lessons from her exploitation. She also reported cautiously monitoring concerning rumors that a new generation of young Southeast Asian women were being recruited for shady internet video projects. When speculation arose about a film dramatizing the assassination, Aisyah and Huong released a joint statement affirming they would share no rights to their story until they were satisfied any production portrayed the human toll responsibly. For now, they wished to continue their quiet lives and work. The pair's restraint stood in contrast to the reaction of Kim Jong-un, who aggressively threatened legal action against any dramatization, still denying the regime's well-documented role. Aisyah tried to put it all out of mind. she still wrestled with anger and confusion over being used as an unknowing weapon in the service of authoritarian power struggles. But those dark puppeteers had long since discarded her. Now she danced alone under her own spotlight. On the anniversary of Jong-nam's death, Aisyah left white flowers at the airport. She thought of the brother whose life had been cut short by toxic regime machinations beyond his control, just as she nearly lost her life to the same forces. Perhaps somewhere their restless spirits had found a measure of peace in breaking free from those who had sought to cage them. For Aisyah, life in the open air still felt fragile. She imagined it might take a lifetime to truly leave the prison of her past behind. But gradually she was learning to forgive her torturers, and most importantly, herself. Somewhere out there, under the same stars, she knew Huong was on that same journey back to life. It would find their way step by halting step. Chapter 12. Somewhere in a secretive underground bunker in North Korea, 3 agents gathered nervously to debrief each other. The same thought hung over them. Had they gotten away with murder at the airport that day? With Kim Jong-un personally overseeing the operation, failure was not an option. He had been explicit: his exiled half-brother must die before he could gather any clout or sympathy that might undermine the regime. Jong-nam's assassination had to seem invisible. An unremarkable man dying quietly in a crowded terminal from apparent illness. Surveillance footage erased and chemical evidence disposed of expertly. That was why these agents were selected to carefully orchestrate a team of manipulators in Malaysia. Their mission: recruit local women desperate to be TV stars who could be coerced into unwittingly administering the poison. The manipulators played their roles flawlessly, posing as charismatic producers to win the women's trust through weeks of fake auditions and training. When the unsuspecting patsies smeared Jong-nam's face with nerve agent, the agents watched smugly from a distance, certain their covert mission was complete. But the women's very public arrest threatened to expose the elaborate ruse. The agents scrambled to obstruct the Malaysia investigation, spreading misinformation and threats. They suspected the truth would emerge eventually. But by then, outrage might fade to ambivalence. What mattered most was securing the regime's immediate stability. The men tiptoed readily around any mention of Kim Jong-un now, though, not wishing to trigger suspicion that they doubted his unquestionable wisdom. None of them would dare breathe a word of regret, even in this hidden sanctum. Just solemn vows to follow the divine leader unto death. Their muted facial expressions and body language hold another story, however. Furrowed brows, drawn mouths, tense postures, and sidelong glances betrayed their anxiety. Whatever misgivings the agents privately harbored about this sloppy operation, they would bury them for self-preservation. The bunker atmosphere turned palpably relieved when confirmation came weeks later that the scapegoat's murder charges were dropped. No further inquiry into puppet masters behind the scenes would be forthcoming. The women's lives mattered little to the agents. It was potential exposure of the regime that concerned them most. They dispersed back into shadows, departing the only secret space where flickers of dissent might be detectable if one observed closely enough. On the surface, it was just another successful mission serving the supreme leader's vision. But now a nagging specter of doubt and remorse lingered somewhere in the recesses of the agents' minds, threatening long-instilled certitudes. Even the most rigorous conditioning had its limits. Harsh fluorescent lights flicked on automatically in the little hotel room near the Kuala Lumpur airport, stirring Siti Aisyah from restless dreams before dawn. She slowly sat up on the creaky mattress, pausing for a moment to absorb her surroundings. This was the same airport hotel where the fake production company first put Aisyah and the other recruited women up 5 years earlier. Back then, dazzled by the promise of stardom, they had giggled together late into the night, giddy about the adventure ahead. Now returning alone, that wide-eyed girl seemed lifetimes removed from the weary but resolute woman Aisyah had become. She glanced over at the dressing table, regarding her own face in the smudged mirror. Traces of innocence still lingered in her expression, but profound sadness had etched itself there too. Sighing, Aisyah got up and slipped out into the quiet pre-dawn streets. She still found sleep elusive most nights. But rather than tormenting her, the insomnia had become almost comforting, as solitary hours where memories and reflections could keep her company untroubled. A light mist hung in the air as Aisyah strolled aimlessly, no destination in mind. In this meditative state, her thoughts drifted to Doan and Huong. Last Aisyah had heard, Huong was thriving in southern Vietnam, still guiding vulnerable youth while also finding joy again in performing. Her friend had even fallen in love with a kind, artistic man who saw her humanity beyond the infamy. Aisyah smiled, imagining Huong busy, rehearsing some new skit to amuse children at an orphanage. She wished she could see her partner in reconciliation again soon, embrace the woman who alone could truly understand this long, painful journey of theirs. Other memories flashed through Aisyah's mind too, of 3 little siblings huddled around a bowl of rice back home in their Indonesian village, of her mother's endless prayers and tears, of a father's anguished hopelessness realizing he could not protect his child from the wicked traps of the world. But most of all, in these solitary pre-dawn hours, Aisyah thought of Kim Jong-nam. She had come to view the exiled North Korean not as a faceless stranger, but as a fellow pawn brutalized by the oppressive regime that had warped his homeland. Both their lives were sacrificed to serve the xenophobic jealousies of the ruling family. Aisyah whispered a prayer for Jong-nam's spirit, hoping he had found some semblance of freedom in death that political maneuverings denied him in life. She fingered the glass vial of perfume in her pocket containing essence of ilang ilang, flower of flowers, cultivated on Aisyah's home island of Java. It was a small token of humanity for a man, the world forced into the cold role of mere symbol. The mist dissipated as Aisyah approached the airport's Terminal 2 and rode the escalator up. She froze momentarily, seeing the exact spot where Jong-nam had collapsed, poison racing through his veins. Shaking off the vision, she continued on. In a secluded bathroom stall near the gate from which Jong-nam was set to depart years ago, Aisyah carefully opened her vial of perfume. She wetted a handkerchief with the sweet floral fragrance and placed it on the floor. She had no other gifts or power to honor his unsettled soul beyond this humble perfume from her homeland. Aisyah closed her eyes and whispered, "Forgive me." Silent tears fell as she mourned the tragic intersection of lives and machinations, far beyond individual control. After some minutes passed, Aisyah dried her eyes and emerged renewed. She had done what she could for the dead. Now, as the airport came to life around the living, it was time to embrace the gift she still possessed, the chance to write her own future. The end.